Yeah, there you go.
Okay, welcome to our council work meeting for Wednesday, February 12th. We start with 1.1, review of this evening's agenda. Any changes, additions, questions? Okay. 1.2, future agenda items. Okay, like how this is going. Council discussion of future citizen recognitions, anything, Jackie, nothing? Nothing tonight or anything? Okay.
Sorry, Mayor, to derail. We got parade and stuff coming up soon. When's that? Marshall, stuff like that, starting to talk about.
We'll probably start talking about it in March, April. We usually do a nomination from the public for a veteran. We like to pay for a veteran and community, and then we'll come back to it. You can change that if you want.
Nope.
Whatever you guys want to do.
I changing anything.
No changes. Okay.
I'd like to nominate Mayor as Marshall.
You can do that. Okay, we'll move on to 2.1 then. January city status report. Trevor, thanks for being here, my friend.
Thanks, Mayor, Council.
Thanks for coming back after the abuse of last meeting.
They still pay me, so I'm still here. Let's see, we've got, the January report here, as well as a year-end summary that was also brought in. If there are any questions, I'm happy to go through them. We did, I will point out on the monthly one, sorry, John, to just keep flipping back and forth, but on the monthly for January, we did get updated median sale price numbers and affordable housing unit, I should put the quotes in there on the paper.
Yes.
But updated numbers from the Realtor group, and so those are included here. Both have gone up since Q2 of '24, which is the last data point that we had received from them. So just of note for you folks.
Just only one comment, was the businesses, just to shout out to our social development team, just to Sandra and Blake and your team for 25 new businesses. Anytime we just continue to see those climb, it's a lot of work on your part, so thanks for doing a great job.
Sandra's awesome. 2025 is gonna be big.
I know she listens, so, yeah, ditto, but.
She does a great job.
And I'd just make one other comment, and I don't mean to be overly dogmatic, but I mean to be overly dogmatic. Under the housing data where we put the affordable housing unit, I think that is a terrible nomenclature. I don't think that is an accurate definition, nor is it meaningful in the context of how it's defined. And if we're gonna put that up there, we need to say exactly what that's for. Because an affordable housing unit for somebody making minimum wage is not that number. An affordable housing unit for somebody making $6.7 million a year, that's not the right number. So we need to make sure that we're being accurate about that number if we're gonna make this a part of our city statistics and something we're making a part of the record. We need to define that better, so. I'm not saying that's not an accurate number, what I'm saying is the definition is meaningless at this point.
So the realtors have a definition, that's where we get that number from, so we can just.
And the label for it as well, is just
Which is
peeled from them.
80%, right?
It's some convoluted, it is a very fine print formula that they've
But
included, and so, point well taken. There is some methodology that's used to arrive at the number. My question is, what do we wanna call it, if anything, or do we want to strike it from the presentation? I'm happy to.
I'm assuming
just-
the reason that we're including it in there is because of the legislature requirements for these different things, yes.
So that'll become important, that number actually, once we start looking at, like the fizz and affordability. I believe, I'm trying to find that definition here, but I believe the realtors are using the definition the state has kind of latched on. Now, the state has another definition that says if it's less than 450, it's affordable. But this is based off of the average income in Harriman versus the county. So that's where it would become important, is that the FIZ is going, right now the proposal is to change that from a county number of income for affordability to the city number. But we'll find that and we can,
Yeah,
And for
just,
me, the only reason to include it is because of whatever legislative requirements are, otherwise
Like,
otherwise it's meaningless.
yeah, and look, there are, the most common definitions usually have to do with the percentage of the adjusted median income, right? And so if that's an 80% number, if that's a 60% number, if that's a 120% number, it's important to understand the context that that's in.
so
And
it's,
the reason I'm being specific is that the legislature throws out terms all the time like affordable housing or attainable housing or starter houses. And they have no idea what that means as far as how much money people actually have to spend to buy these houses and how they're gonna get it. So, oh, that's affordable,
So
well then
then-
why don't you boost some wages?
here's the definition, it's affordable housing unit, this is per the realtors, is defined as 30% of the gross monthly income for all housing expenses and utilities. So essentially, I think what they did is they took your income, put it to a month, took 30%, calculated a number, and that's what that is, which is why it's different for every community. So, above 30%, you'd be considered housing, well, and that number keeps changing. You get 50%, you're burdened, 30% you're, I can't remember what the phrase, the buzzword is, 30% is supposed to be affordable, so
And
Look, I'm just gonna make a statement.
it probably should be the housing that you can
Having-
afford with that income.
I have a 30-year career in commercial and residential real estate finance. I am not equivocating at all in saying I am an absolute expert when it comes to what is affordable for residential houses. That number doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And then if we're gonna put it in our statistics, I want it to be meaningful.
it's kind of,
That's my only requirement, is that that definition doesn't have any meaning.
it's kind of like the effort from the county and the state during COVID, the free word that we use a lot. And it's the same thing, we use these words to cause panic or cause decision making because we attach certain phrases to it, and it's not really explaining what
Right.
this means, it's adding to the propaganda, if you will, of here's what they want the issue to be.
So would you like us just to include that definition? Cause again, this is not a number we've created, this is one we're pulling from a housing report that the realtors are providing across the valley to your
Do we need
legislators.
that on there? I don't know if we need that.
We can take it off.
I'll say it's
off.
meaningless to me
Let's take it
unless we're tracking it
For anything.
in
And if we have
regards
to
to
report it,
some
we
sort of
report somewhere. I
Well,
think
we
take it
will,
off.
but we don't need to put it on here to track it.
Take it off.
I agree.
You okay with that?
Yeah. Two things that I saw, I know we have ADUs in our city, but we're not showing any on the graph, is it that minuscule? And then if I could see percentages of those types of housing. So when we say that we're full of high density or multifamily apartments or condos or whatever that is, having those percentages would be.
The licensed ADUs
Yeah.
are minuscule.
Okay.
It's really small. Now, we all know that there are many who are operating without a
Subleasing,
license,
yeah.
right? But
Yeah, I think that's one of our challenges we've tried to figure out, cause if people finish a basement, and I've had this conversation with a resident who finished their basement, they're upset about ADUs, but they rent their basement out, but they don't view that as an ADU. But
Well, then you turn
it
it
is an
into-
ADU, right? It's an accessory unit inside your.
Yeah.
So, and we used to do those a lot without, I think, either with our
Tracking.
permission or without our permission, figuring out how many those are, I don't know, we've talked about looking wherever the address has been split on one lot where we know it's single family, but the address is split, that probably tells you there's an apartment there. But that's a number we also have to start reporting in the MIH, the
moderate income.
Moderate Income Housing Plan.
Yeah.
So, okay,
The financial piece of that again is infrastructure, impact fees that involved in that, please keep that in mind.
I think we can't charge them for internal ADUs, because they're using the same
There's no
meter, same
additional
connections,
fees.
everything like that. An external,
I'm saying from a legislative
External
perspective, right?
TBD.
Yeah.
Right, the cost of those things.
Thanks, Trevor.
Good job, Trevor.
Sorry, Trevor, don't mean to put you in front of the firing line.
Making your
It's
job
good though.
easier,
There's a
you can
common
strike
denominator.
one more thing.
With your presentation, so just.
Just like to pick on you.
No, we appreciate all you do. Trevor, okay. We'll go to 2.2 mid biennial budget review and discussion.
okay. Just gonna bring it up. So what this is, we're in our middle of our biennium, so we don't need to go through each fund or each fund and division like we did. So this is an opportunity that at this time to kind of take a step back and talk kind of priorities and policy direction as we look at the budget. And so the intent tonight is to give you some context. There's really only probably one thing you need to give us direction on. But really, I want to give you some context because as we have additional meetings, it's not coming to you in a vacuum. So think of this tonight as hopefully not the fire hose, but there's a lot of, we're going to give you kind of some high-level information in ways. Talk a little bit about the expenses and revenues I picked the three funds that provide most of the services, general fund, HDC and fire safety area. Look at a little bit of taxes, talk about some of the fund balances, and then discuss the future challenges. There's only one piece we have to think about. So at a training in November, the league pointed out that not in Salt Lake County, but in another county, that county, I don't know if it was who in the county government said, if you don't include a truth in taxation in your calendar, they weren't going to let them hold one. So it was a big fight. So the league was like, that deadline is March 1. We send a calendar or something to the county. It's a question of whether Salt Lake will do it. So the league said out of best practice, you probably should make sure you talk about it before March 1st. So it's a possibility. Doesn't mean you have to do it because we couldn't tell you what that looked like right now, which is why the March 1st, the way I read the law, I don't think you have to, but I don't get to make those decisions. And it's not clear if the state auditor would agree with our county to the north who did that. So that'll be something we talk about at the end. It's really just, do we include that possibility in the budget calendar we're supposed to submit to the county? And if we do, and we do it, then we've got it. And if we choose not to, we just strike it off the calendar after the fact. So let's walk through some of our revenues. And that last one's not really something we're gonna talk about, but I do want us to be thinking when we're talking, I know this council's focused on that. When we talk about additional revenues, you can take more or you can try and grow the pie. And I think that's what we've been talking about is how do we grow that so that ours also increases without putting additional burdens.
Can we have a different flavor, cause the one we have is kind of,
Pie type of stuff?
yeah, it's.
You want pumpkin or?
Well, let me show you what we have. So this is expenditures. Now, so this was kind of, and these are budgeted expenditures of those three funds. So contract services, that's actually our contract with UFA. Personnel's about 44%. Operations between police and the general fund, 24%. Capital outlays this year is fairly large. This transfer out is actually, I think, to debt service. I tried to remove anything that was, I'm gonna show you. So that's just kind of an overall, you get the sense of scope. These are our revenues. That is property tax, which is really hard to see on that screen. I should have made that white. Sales tax, again, this is the consolidated of those. I think last time we talked about, well, what are the funding mix? Well, you've got, this is your unique funding mix, and these two. Yeah, we get paid for some stuff that's happening in the city. Without our permission, but that's okay.
I just didn't know we were getting any of that.
And it's a small amount, I did include everything, this slice here is there's a lot of little stuff happening in there, even like this little motor vehicle. But those are your revenues, I mean, we're still primarily a property tax dependent. Sales tax has been changing as we go. You don't see in here any transfers between, because that's not real. I was trying to come up with money in, actual money, not money between funds, because that's just us bringing it with one hand and moving it to the other usually, so. I'll stand back here.
I think it's probably important to just remember that these are
You'll stand up there.
like the title up there, general fund and public safety, cause we have been having meetings and talking about, it's only a little over $1 million, and then they see this and it's like 17 million, that's because that includes fire and police and.
Correct, and I've got a chart on here, I'll show you what the percentages are. So sales tax, let's take a step back, I think we have been working hard to grow this one, and I should point out, 2020 to 2024, we've doubled our direct sales tax. Right, that's,
But have we as a percentage compared to the population?
well, no, we'll get to, that's the next chart. It's grown, right, and so when you think about that, wow, you doubled it, the chances of doubling it again.
What costs us money
Pretty
for
poor,
services?
Yeah, and this steep here was that first a lot of population growth. We are seeing it flatten. So by doubling that, you're not doubling the 9, but you come up quite a bit. You'll see it really, I mean, we were at 20%, now we're at 26%. So it's better, 2.3% more collection, but you're correct, it hasn't, this is still pretty small compared. Our population is still our major driver in sales tax, but our growth, the number of homes that were built are permitted in the last year has slowed down quite a bit from the high, what was the high, like 1,500 and
I think, yeah.
2018, 2015, there was this huge number, and we've been in the sixes. This last year, we were at like 450, something like that. I think we'll see that tick up a little bit, but I don't think we'll ever see 1,500 or 1,000 in a year.
I agree.
Cause a lot of the easier dirt's been built on.
Yep.
And interest rates are holding back
Building
builders.
materials 10 years ago were substantially less too.
Yeah. So that's sales tax. So I wanted to talk before I'm gonna show you some other charts here, and this will help you make sense. So, inflation, right? We talked a lot about inflation. So, doing a 5-year rolling average and a 10-year rolling average over the last 100 years in the United States, right? The orange is the 10-year, so you see that there is some difference. We could have done a year over year, but it would just be much more chaotic. This smooths it out a little bit, so you'll see why. So this is more of a thought exercise, but again, in context. When you hear things, or we talk, what does it actually mean? What does that impact? What does that look like? So for the city, some of the smaller cities and just some of the other cities in the state have said, we just hold our mill levy the same every year, regardless of what the county says, we just keep it the same. And if you've done that since 2019, you'd see this increase. This is, the increase you see on this baseline is new homes, right? You haven't increased the city's sales tax or property tax, it's just new homes that are coming in. If you'd done this, you'd see this. So that approach probably makes sense when I'm talking to those cities. Those are cities that aren't growing very fast. They're kind of built out. Their mill levy and what the county is probably pretty close. They're not seeing wild swings. We're seeing swings just because we're growing, we have this property values going up. So if you did a 10-year inflation, so think of this as purchasing power, but $1 here can't buy, right? It's this much less, this. So 10-year average will put you here, 5-year average puts you here, year over year puts you here. There's, going back to this chart, was our 10-year rolling average, Trevor, on this?
0.7 about.
About 2.7-ish. Median inflation over the last 100 years is 2.73. Average inflation over the last 100 years is 3.02. So 10-year rolling average seems to match that fairly closely. It just smooths out. The 5-year, you don't have as much time to smooth. So just some thoughts, keep that in mind. Just same kind of chart for HCC. You'll see here was the property tax increase we did for the additional officers. Again, this orange one, I don't think makes sense for us, but we put it in there because you might hear about it at the league, because that's where I heard about it. People are like, oh, this is what we're doing, so just so you can see it. Again, thought exercise, citizens should know we're right here, we didn't do any of this. But again, that's your short, the purchasing power that's lost depending on which inflation index you use. This one's a little unique because it's shorter, significantly shorter, and a lot of because it's short, I think that's why this orange one's underneath these, because this, in 23, the inflation was still
Greater.
fairly robust, and so you saw just this weird thing happening here. So if one of the things is not like the other, it's HCFSA. You remember you started it before this, but there's this whole weird thing where we brought it into the city to start it, and then we took it back out of the city.
Weird regulation thing we had to follow.
Yeah. So this is just kind of a gee whiz kind of slide. Back in 2014, your mill levies, most people were paying about I don't know what that is, but above 1.6 for their mill levies. Now they're paying less, but that's a function of property values going up, right? And other things your mill levy's coming down to provide that same. This is the city's portion, and for these history, we just included our increase and our R's along our HFCA with UFSA's range and HCC with Slippy, so we put them on the same line so the chart didn't look super weird. Thought this might be easier to see is your percentage. Harriman used to be 2.4, we're now down at 1.7. 11.3 for fire, 12.6. The school districts are still close to 50% of a citizen's property taxes in the schools. And again, I think that represents actual increases because everybody else's decrease is due to the property value. As it goes up, if you're guaranteed the same amount each year as property values go up, you can take a lower mill rate and still get that kind of funding.
If we ran consistent, it'd be the 2.4 throughout, if we made that, right, in 2014?
Well, yeah, no, because, this is a function of everybody's property tax, and so as the county's gone up, our percentage has gone down.
Okay.
You would, yeah, I didn't try to model that, what that would have looked like. Because we didn't do it, this is really kind of what exists. So the other one, essentially the same kind of chart, but this just shows you the actual percentages so you can see. And I know it feels like cities take the brunt of any of these property tax increases when it's probably right there that most of the
Yeah.
grief is aimed at.
Frustration.
Besides the
And the rest, if
mosquitoes.
you add those up, is the county.
Yeah, and there's, there's a lot you could talk about, well, why does that one have it? It's a function of a lot of either their debt or whatever they've got, they're using it to fund.
And most of that is perception, right? With the paying property tax, it goes to the place, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's just not how it works.
And everybody knows it's really the mosquito district
Yeah.
right there. Painfully large. I didn't push them out, but they're pretty small. Several of these are small.
My favorite is when you point out that the library gets 4.1 and your city gets 1.7.
Yep. Yeah. Sticks out. So, and should point out if you combine, between police, fire, and city, we get about 26% of the sales tax, 25.6%. So a little over a quarter. Again, it's funding all those services. The city itself, that 1.7, it's not a huge amount. If you pay $5,000 in property tax, you're probably paying us $85
Wish I was like me.
for the city itself. Police and fire is a different question. Yes, if you add it together.
Sure. Getting you for like $1.50.
So, again, context for as we start discussing some challenges. So I should point this out. Every city probably chart looks like this. So don't feel like the world's ending. It's just something as you make decisions here, to be aware of what the impact. So this one, I don't have the notes up here, but so in the general fund, we looked at it and said, okay, what if we have to, we add some personnel,
About 5 people.
just kind of stagger them through.
Yeah.
We'll talk about so this is what we're saying, it's probably reality, right? As you grow, you're gonna have to add some people, in certain departments to just function. Whether it's, as you add police officers, eventually you need additional HR people. If you add more crews, you get HR, finance, those kind of things, IT, so support. I'll show you that list. So this is just what it is. Oh, I should have clicked it. This happens when I don't have the little notes screen up on my computer. So we didn't add any vehicles, but that's just kind of saying, hey, that 2025 bond and debt, that's to pay off all those MDA obligations that we would pay for later. And later officially is right here. This is after later. Post later, I don't know what we call it now, but. So, again, that's just, you see that chart and say, okay, that, you couldn't do it that way. I'll say we're also conservative, pessimistic about our revenues. The vibes are still all over the place. We asked the wrecking ball, it's been pretty close recently. This morning, we said, hey, is this gonna get better? And it said, aren't you sweet? Is that what it was?
Aren't
Or
you precious?
aren't you precious? So
We all know
I'm
what
taking
that
that as
means.
a negative,
Yeah.
so I don't think that's a positive response from it, so.
Aren't you naive?
Depends on how much sugar's in the sweet tea.
So, again, just keeping it for context purposes, if you did the 10-year, if you just applied a 10-year, that inflation number from the 10-year, rolling average, that's what your general fund with those same assumptions does. So it actually can make a difference over time. Not saying you have to, but that is, now our target balance is here, so you'd be below your target, but you would still be within the state's amount, and you're not there. So, again, thought as you think through. This is the police. And so that might be aggressive, but as we continue to grow, we see things changing a little bit. You'll start adding police and eventually a permanent facility. What you're gonna see in this and fire was when you add facilities, we're gonna have to do something for the funding stream. How do you pay for that building? And we didn't have public works in the general, did we? So that will make it go steeper, right? So here, then we said, if you did the inflation, it's still the building here and then that number of officers every year over 10 years. I don't know if that's realistic, but you just added 2. I think that buys us a few years. But as Olympia pushes to the west and DAI and Panorama starts coming to the south, we're pulling those officers a little bit more. So just, I think, to get the coverages that we're used to, you'd have to do that. And then this, what did I do on this one? Oh, take the building out just so you could see. Scale wise, it looks the same, but that's 25 million in the whole, and that's only 7 million, so it's just an issue with the chart. So it would be tough to add an officer every year with just doing inflation, right? You'd have to think about that if you're adding. And again, we've been pretty pessimistic on our property tax growth. based on the number of homes we've seen in the last few years versus forward. So the one thing I would say is we check this regularly because things change. We met with the school district yesterday and they said 3 years ago they were gonna build all these schools and now as they look at it now, they're not going to. It's the same thing for us. This is really context. So again, I don't want council to think, oh my gosh, it's all, or the citizens, it's, okay. If we make decisions, we have to think about what the long-term effects of that will be. Just go in with your eyes wide open. The fire is the kind of the same thing. This was a guess. I don't know, it really depends on, again, Olympia's build out and DAI's when those stations will need to come on. So we stuck 2 stations in. The debt for those stations to build them and to operate them. So that's what you're seeing here. Again, if you did the inflation, well, it makes it a little better, but it's really, when you add, when we get to that point and we talk about adding another fire station and staffing it, we're gonna have to have a serious talk about, well, what does that look like? Cause the current mill is not set up to fund or staff 3 stations. And the amount that you get from the new homes isn't, again, we're a little pessimistic, but we'll see, right? We'll have to see when we get there, so don't take this to the bank, that's what we're gonna need. But I just want you to understand that the downward trend is definitely there when you add the stations.
For fire in particular, the new growth number is not enough to pay for both the staff and the operation of the station and to build the station.
Sure.
That's the build.
And I, you know, sometimes it's easier to do the debt, cause that'll come off, that disappears. In theory, it'll disappear, right? It's a 20-year note, 20 years, future council, who knows what they'll do with that, so you never wanna tell citizens, it'll come off for sure, it's like, we've designed it to do that. And
Never seen
somebody in the
any
future, who knows what
money.
they'll do, maybe they have to build a 5th station with that.
They all say, well, they're used to paying, let's use that for
Now we-
something else.
This is probably out of the context, but when we're looking at those, are we looking at joint things like we've seen popping up around where you have joint uses, the fire station and the police station?
Ah, yes.
You know, those kinds of
So,
things. trying
so
to-
that's actually,
Another
my
slide.
next slide. I think I have it, I know I have it on one of these slides, that's an excellent segue, so kind of in the short term, what we're thinking we're gonna have to do, well, we know what we have to do, is we need to talk about the CIP, which is our capital improvement plan, and I'll show you a chart on that in a second. So the interesting thing is, as a council, you have a little bit of control over revenue, right? You could raise taxes, so you have some control over revenue. You have more control on expenses. When we talk about that, understand that's also this, that level of service piece. And so that's that balance. And then just in the next few years, we do have some critical staffing challenges. And part of that is just this, we had this hyperinflation, well, abnormally high inflation for our country for the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years. And hopefully that'll come down, but its effects are still there. So mid to long term, 4 to 10 years, got to deal with facilities. And it's something with Public Works, something with the police main. We've talked about police substations because of the geographic extent of the city. Instead of having officers come all the way back, if they have a substation, they can stay in their area and do things, helps them be more efficient.
Seems to make way more sense to have that rather than one large.
Oh, yeah.
It really does, and you capitalize on the cost savings when you co-locate
Yeah.
the building.
Yeah.
So we've just putting that in there, you gotta think about this. Fire stations, the Dark Horse, it's called Dark Horse, sorry.
Yes.
I was thinking Black Horse also, but that's.
Modeling software.
The modeling software that UFA uses showed us locations for 2 stations, so that's the 2 we've modeled. Those are really based, again, off the Panorama development and the Olympia development. And actually, we're looking at property at Slick for that one, just because that's next to a major intersection, will allow them to get around a little bit better and hopefully not next to a school, so it's trapped like 123 is at certain times of day. But, so those are things mid to long term, thinking about that. So increased population equals increased resource, I hear this all the time, but it also means increased demands for services. The more people we have come on, So when people say, well, you're growing, you should have new money. We do, and we have new citizens who want services, and for police and fire, that tends to lag a couple years. So the new people will move in, and we won't see their growth in those property taxes for a year, 18 months, something like that. It depending on when they move in, because there's that, depending on when their house closes. So there is a slight delay there. And then just again, staffing and meet service levels. So really the question is, it's a math equation, right? You can adjust either side, but just recognize that if service levels and staffing are on one side and revenues and expenditure, what you do to one happens in the other. We just want everybody to think that through, because our current levels, we give great service. They're not written in stone, they have to stay that way. Our taxes aren't written in stone, but I just trying to give you some context for some of the challenges that opportunities we'll be seeing here as we go forward. And then again, just to highlight some of the challenges I think are coming up staffing wise. Finance, we approved an additional position, we've delayed it. Same with IT, records, we're using some AI software right now, Jackie's using, that's hopefully gonna free up some time, but there'll be some pressure. May not be a full-time, maybe it's a part-time to help with some of the stuff that AI can't do. These are just things I think in the next little while. Emergency management, we have a part-time slot there, and then Commander Adams spends a lot of time on it. It may be one where eventually we think, okay, we need somebody to focus on this all the time. I don't know that it made a difference in Los Angeles, but it could in a community our size. So just something to think about. Legal, we're seeing as we grow, we're seeing a lot more stuff come through. I don't know, it's because people just love Todd so much, they like to sue us and whatnot. The challenges that are coming up as a growing city, right? You have more people, there's more opportunities for things to happen. Police, again, we just did these out. I don't know that we'll see pressure for the next 2 years, but we'll see, right? It really kind of depend on those statistics. And again, I think the geographic, as the city pushes, that's where we're gonna start seeing the pinch first. Is it won't actually be the types of crime, it'll just be our ability to get someplace quickly because we're farther and farther afield. So, and parks, just remember, whenever you we're gonna add some cool parks. They're awesome. This 10-acre park down in by Mountain Ridge. It's gonna be great. That takes somebody to take the trash out and all that. We are pretty lean right now. We're using a lot of seasonals, which are great. But you saw it this last meeting, right? We shifted some money to try and do seasonals because we just need bodies at certain times, so that's a challenge. And then mid to long term, same kind of things, police, those facilities, whether you bring on 1 or 2 fire stations. As these things change, you still see pressure in these departments, and then of course, as you grow, your crews have more to do. And so just be thinking, I don't need you to say, well, here's how we're gonna solve it. But I think those are the things, and some of it's a conversation with the citizens, well, what do they expect? A lot of people have really high expectations when they want the service right then. But when you ask them to pay for it, they're like, well, I don't want to pay anymore.
Right.
I just want you right now. So it's kind of a challenge.
Negative discussion, right? We've always been complaining about all of the construction, the same people that complain that the improvements aren't coming fast.
It is, it's this challenge that you all, we're gonna speak at an MPA class, the mayor and I, next week, I think. But one of the things on there when you do budgeting is, and I think this is the hardest job that you all have, is managing citizen expectations. Right? I pay taxes, I should get, you spend all this time looking at the budget and you know that what they pay doesn't necessarily buy what they think it buys anymore.
It doesn't, it's not that it necessarily, doesn't.
It doesn't, right? And so
Not
that's
like
that
it did in
challenge.
the very
Their
beginning,
perception is
yeah.
completely disconnected.
Yeah. So how do you, so, and I do, I'm actually gonna let the mayor talk about that with those students, but I think that's the hardest thing you all have to do. There's also some managing internally with staff, and I can help you on that one, and even on the other one, but those expectations, what people, their perception that what the city can do versus what, when we go out and get a bid and find out that things are just significantly more expensive than we thought.
Sorry,
So-
if I can, I make that comment a lot of times, I don't mean that disparagingly, it's a little bit frustrating in our position, but I also tell anybody I talk to, I was blissfully ignorant myself before I get involved in any of this stuff. I had the same perception, same things until I got immersed in this and had to understand it, so.
So one of the things, as we move forward in this process, we're gonna need to dedicate, and I think this is probably a night to itself, a couple hours to talk about the capital plan and the priorities. So what we intend to do, so you got 28 million in the general fund, a lot of that's the, you'll see it's pretty front-loaded in this plan. This is after 27, so I just grabbed the plan that we had as of like 3 days ago, downloaded it and totaled it up, and so we're gonna have to have a meeting where we go through, we're trying to, what we'll propose is here's how we prioritize these and recommend, and let you go through them and move them around or see if you agree with this, disagree with this, it'll be fine, but we're trying to get you enough information so that this is a meaningful conversation. And we can talk about, when we have that meeting, we can talk about some of the challenges with, say, park impact fees and transportation impact fees. You know, what's realistic. And we're actually working on the parks right now. We're using those analysis questions as kind of a test run. I think it's been a little bit more in-depth than, or harder than, because that's a big lift, but we're working through that for you. So we'll have a meeting, we'll put something out to ask when you wanna do that, because we have an internal group that's gonna meet and prioritize those, and I'm very mindful of Kyle, how much time Kyle has since he chairs that, and so he did set it, but just being realistic, again, as this is really, a lot of this is going to come into, as we, in December, we will start, or probably November, we're actually gonna start our next budget process. Sadly, it's already coming again. And it'll be here before, at least that part of my brain knows it. It'll all of a sudden be here. It's like, oh my goodness, we're doing this again. So we're trying to get, as we have this in the spring, some policy direction from you all so that when we start to prepare that, we understand kind of the direction, your sense at that higher policy level. And then we'll go back through like we did this time where you go through and say, yeah, I like that, or no, I don't like that. So again, so the only real question for you tonight, after all that talking, do you want us to include the possibility of a truth in taxation in our calendar, and if so, which funds?
My short answer.
I will tell you, my recommendation is include it on all three that use it, and it's in the calendar. If you wanna do it, you can. If you don't, we just adopt the budget earlier.
Agree
It just-
100%,
Yes to that.
Is that,
because it's,
A
that's.
couple of, are you,
I think I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done.
this is a good opportunity to introduce a budget concept I've been thinking a lot about. Dug into police and fire especially, so you guys are the ones that tip the scales on this stuff. Those uniforms cost a lot of money. But as I've talked about, I know what I'm going through with UFA and adjusting the way that we look at things there. Been thinking a lot about, and it applies to them as well, but our police fund, right, and our sources of revenue versus the expenses we have. So there's two main sources of revenue, and then it might be good to, if you show that pie chart again. Because we have one source of revenue in property taxes that is pretty much fixed, right? The only new money we get is from new growth, new properties coming on, which in turn demand services, right? So we made the distinction already with HPD and knowing full well that we'll have to adjust these things as we go and see how it works, et cetera. But we've
You want
made
the expenses?
just the revenue for now, right? I mean, cause I look at the property tax and 99% of that is police and fire, right? So we look at property tax, it's a fixed number, right? So you set a percentage, and this is what people don't understand with property tax. You set a percentage, basically initial rate, that establishes that baseline dollar amount you can collect from those existing properties, right? So the next year, when your property value goes up, we don't get to collect more money from your property. We get the same dollar amount, and they have to adjust the percentage to meet the dollar amount. There's another equalization thing that is not worth going into all the details of that, but that's the issue there. So there's no inflation factor in that property tax to pay for a service that is very much the cost of the service is very much affected by inflation. That's a huge problem, right? So the way it's been dealt with in the past is, well, we'll just use the new growth money to pay for the inflation, and then when we need to increase the services, then that's when we'll do a tax increase, and it's every so often, and it just becomes a bigger increase and a bigger increase, right? And it's not a very sustainable model, in my opinion. You don't need to switch, but if you look to the percentages, and you look at Jordan School District, not to pick on them or even the county, their percentage of the pie has grown and grown and grown because they do that, and instead of having an average inflationary increase to pay for it on top of the new growth that they've had, they add more and more and more because they do that big lump sum increase and they spend all the money. It's not spent on inflation, it's spent on the catch up on inflation stuff, but then they spend even more. Just think about your budget. If it's in your checking account, like, well, you're more likely to spend it than if it's separated for something else. So they spend it all, and then inflation happens again, and more services are needed, and so we do more, and the average increase has been 8% per year with those entities, rather than the 3%. But yet they're crying out that the reason they're doing it is inflation. That's not true, right? They mismanaged it in between, so we're making an effort to account for that. So the reason we're bringing this up now is we said, what, a year and a half ago now, that all we're looking at is separating that property tax money for that baseline service, and we're ignoring the inflation piece. We wanna address that separately, so we're obviously are gonna need to do something for inflation. So here's the next budgeting concept I wanted to introduce. The other portion that we have, the sales tax, that is adjusted for inflation, right? You think about how sales tax works, the cost of goods and the percentage that you pay as a tax on those cost of goods, and the number, that does go up with inflation, right? So this is just a concept for everyone to think about. And then you can go to the other graphs that show the percentage of sales tax by population versus location, right? As our growth starts to decline and we develop our commercial areas that we have set aside and are looking at ways to stoke those, right? And that increases, I would propose that we need to think about separating a percentage of sales tax to go to, especially your public safety services, to pay for the inflationary portion, rather than rely solely on property tax. That makes sense? And then they're both built in, and we don't have to go through this cycle and potentially at some point jeopardize that level of service for, in my opinion, the most important service we provide. We're responsible to provide for residents. It's just a concept. I'm not saying, I'm not throwing out percentage or anything, but just a concept that I'd like us to think about and add to our planning as we start to build out our commercial plan.
The only concern I have about doing something like that is there's also periods of deflation. And when those happen, you're shrinking those funds at times where it may still be necessary to grow them. And so, having a variable index as a basis for funding public safety isn't the,
I'm saying
I'm not sure I love that.
if we're looking at those funds and doing the same thing, the same concept as far as separating them, setting them aside for that purpose, that's all I'm saying. right? It's not necessarily relying on them, but setting them aside for that purpose. And in those, you could go to that up and down chart, right? Those are the periods that you're talking about. In those years, if we've done a proper job setting aside the fund balance for it, it evens it out.
Yeah, but if you look at, say, 1983 to 2023, the 20-year deflation, during those times you have higher risks of public safety and higher instances. And that's when you need more funds. And if you're relying more on sales tax, even that 3 to 5% to carry that inflation, in the good years, you're not gonna have that in deflation years. It's a good
So
concept.
again, my concept,
Yeah.
what I just explained is that when you take that, whatever that percentage is, you're not spending it all every year, you're separating it, it's a fund balance, so you're
Well,
building that up exactly for that reason. So all I wanna
Yeah.
propose is just the concept of separating a portion of that kind of future sales tax money from the local part to help offset the inflation part. Not saying it would be 100%, not proposing it in percentages, I would just wanna introduce the concept.
And there'd be some years you wouldn't set it aside for that deflation, is what you're saying.
I'd like to see that chart,
In what a chart.
projected out, if we can somehow.
Trevor?
it also affects our CIP and what we're gonna be talking about in the future, right? Because we're still gonna have projects out of the sales tax.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I
The
think,
biggest problem with these
You have-
projections is you're including the facilities, which I've already said,
That don't exist yet.
what, yeah, we don't have right now, the growth and the current tax rate is not enough to pay for the uniforms and new buildings. Like that's, to me, that's a separate problem that, you have to address.
How would you, I'd also.
I'm just looking at the operation costs.
I'd like to look at the concept of where you would maintain the levy rate as is year on year rather than just taking the increase of the annual increase of population, of growth. And just maintain the same mill as you're running year to year. That would be one small concept that other cities are doing. And we missed a huge advantage in the 2021, 22, 23 era of that jump of the inflation, but then it is subject to inflation. Some years are gonna be a huge jump, so.
But it's also relying on one revenue source.
True.
sure. Your revenues are pretty stacked to these two, right? So that's certainly something we can, as we start to talk about the. Right. We're in the 25 budget, 26, so when we start building the 27 budget, we can bring that to you as part of the next biennial and say, okay, here's what these different concepts look like.
My
And then
overall
that-
concern is sustainability, especially of those important services, right? And to rely only on property tax, quite frankly, a lot of, I could throw a guess out as percentages, but a good portion of the services that we're providing are not for people paying those property taxes.
Okay,
We can certainly do, any other questions, or are we good?
okay, so we'll do it, put it on the calendar.
We will put something out to, on the CIP, and that, like I said, we're doing some internal stuff first, so we can, I don't wanna just show up with a huge list and say, okay, tell us what to do. I'd like to say, here's what we think fits, and then give you the opportunity to say, well, we'd rather move this up, slide this back, kind of thing, so it's not a, here's the fire hose, tell us what you wanna do kind of approach. So we're still doing some internal work on that. I think Shelley was helping set up.
Yeah, the meeting's next week, but then
The
there'll
work
be
will
follow-up
take-
and then,
And then we still have the metrics or the diagram where what categorizes a needed project on the CIP.
yes.
Yeah, so that's part of it coming up, so we're gonna walk it through, but ultimately, those priorities are your priorities, you get to,
Yeah.
we can say, oh, this is a priority and this is a priority, and you can say, yeah, but this one over here is actually the higher priority. And we'll just nod and say, okay, here's slide.
Great. Shell game. We played that a lot of times.
Well,
It's
Do you
like we
think
don't
we're
have
pushing
enough money
stuff-
to do everything.
To the right on that chart is
There you go.
exactly.
It's like we don't have enough money to do it all. What's going on?
Just like you do at home. Thank you, Nathan. Okay, we'll go to 2.3, community service update, BA.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Mayor
Good
and
to have you
council.
with us.
Yeah, thanks. As I thought about it, it's been a couple years since we met and talked about community services and animal services and gave you an update. Lots of things have happened in that 2-year time. I brought Marcus Beckstead with me to answer questions. I didn't tell him until just now. So if you have questions, he's happy to answer all those. He'll stay after if he needs to. Really, I wanted to touch on a couple things and primarily I'll start with kind of some reorganization between those two units. Both of them were under community services, and what we've done is we've opened a shelter and we've added an administrative law court to our portfolio of things to do. We recognized that we needed to become more efficient, and operating a shelter is super complex for us with staffing that. And so over the last few months, we have reorganized that unit and rebranded it. So if you'll notice, the trucks now all say community services on them. We don't have animal services trucks and community services. And as a part of that, we've done a couple of things. Marcus is the supervisor of both of those units, so we've eliminated that supervisory role that we had in animal services before. But in doing that, we've created an administrative position, and that person is helping on the operation of the shelter. That's Chelsea Torres. She works in the shelter now, but she also is taking on the administrative role of managing the court. We don't have the luxury of, like the Justice Court has an administrative staff that runs day-to-day operations. That's been me, it's been Marcus, we've been bouncing that back and forth. So we have created a position for someone to staff the shelter during business hours during the week and help with the paperwork and the administration of case stuff. She's doing both case management for animal services and community services. The next thing we've done is we've started to work on cross-training those folks. So one of the things we notice is if one of our community services people takes a day off, we don't have one. So we want our animal services people to be able to back up community services. We want our community services people to be able to back up animal services simply because of the number of people we have. So if we have a call on a Saturday and one of our animal services people is taking a vacation day, the other person can step in and help with that role. They can help with the animals that we're housing and taking care of when Chelsea's not in on the weekends and after hours. So we're cross-training them now so that they can all work together. It gives us more people. Doesn't cost us any more, but becomes more efficient with the people that we are using or that we do have. So that's really what we've tried to focus on, is being more efficient with what we already have. And how do we do that? How do we manage a shelter? How do we run our own court? We're doing the court once a month generally. We missed a month here and there, just depending on our our case volume for the court. The next thing is the administrative law judge. That's fairly new for us. It's become, it's been a big undertaking. Todd and I worked together in 2022 and to identify someone to come in and do that service as a contract. I would say that we got probably our best candidate. We got a great candidate. Guardian Law, Gray Christensen is providing that service for us. He's billing, his billing system is about 40% of any of the other candidates that we looked at. So that right there was a big cost savings for us. We got a good deal there. His staff's.
He is efficient.
He is super efficient. He does several cities around Saratoga, Taylorsville, a couple others. We went over to Taylorsville several times and sat through his court, met with his staff, talked through his process. They've been super helpful with sitting down with us and helping us integrate our software into their processes and vice versa, so that our notifications are efficient and effective. We're working together seamlessly on that part. We have a system to push our stuff to the court so it's ready for our hearings. They're mailing out our notifications and doing all those things. Some of that, as we evolve with Chelsea in her new position, we'll probably pull back in-house with the mailings and stuff, because it costs money to mail stuff, and And so if we can do that internally with our staff and save a little bit of money on that bill for the ALJ, we're gonna try and capture that too. Our first ALJ hearing was at the very end of '22. We didn't have that on our budget. It was the very first one we had. We heard 4 cases. And really for the '23 budget year, or the '24 budget year, we had no idea what that cost was gonna look like. We've talked to you folks extensively about some of the things that are eating up the most time, i.e. encroachments, and how to handle those. We set our first budget for the ALJ for $10,000. That first year, we spent $9,200. So looked great, seemed perfect. We set for the next 2 budget years for '25 and '26, $10,000 seemed legit. We're at $14,000 already. And really the reason for that is as the chief and I sat down and looked at it, the mechanism that you have told us that you want us to use and that has been working is compliance. And compliance means that if you have a violation, you come in, we get you into the court, the judge works with you, sets some parameters, expectations, and then asks you to come back. You come back, we get you into compliance, you have a small fine maybe, we move on. There's been a few that have been multiple comebacks as they're going out, getting bids, coming back, updating the judge, doing things like that, but that's adding cost on the other end, on the ALJ side, we're paying for
Is that
multiple
our
visits.
burden, the cost, is it recoverable?
Well, we're recovering it with some administrative fee, so if you make it to the ALJ, there's probably going to be some fine attached to you, but as the fines have calculated on some of these cases, we've got cases that were $15,000 max fine, and once we've got them into compliance, we're charging them $250 administrative fee to try and recoup some of that loss. So are we getting some money? Yes. Are we getting the amount of money we with the court and everything? Absolutely not. But we're getting some money back. However, we're saving a lot of money in what's down the road, and that's abatements and going out either with a contractor or with city staff to force that property to come into compliance. So we've given people lots of leeway. We've worked with people for 2 years to get them to come into compliance with their property, to get things to where we want it, because we simply want it to be clean and well kept and up to speed with the rest of the city so their neighbors aren't upset. We don't want to be in the business of coming out with a weed eater and cutting down all your weeds for you, and that's going to cost us money. We're going to be paying city staff to do that, so we're trying to get them to come into compliance, but it's adding to our expenses with the court. So, yeah, there'll probably be some conversation about, does that $250 for the, you became compliant, and if we have to see you 6 times, maybe the judge will set that a little bit higher. I think that's reasonable. We certainly can entertain that.
The alternative is doing a criminal route and getting in front of a judge 2 years after the fact.
Yeah.
And spending all that time and money preparing for trial, and at the end of the day, likely we're not gonna get fines attached to it, and so it's a much better, more efficient process than the alternative.
Really, and with all of the cases that we have run through the ALJ, we only have 4 right now that have simply either not shown up or not come into compliance, that we're going to have to move on to those next processes because we're not getting them to jump. Everybody else has become compliant. Some have been longer and more tedious, but at the end of the day, they've become compliant. And a lot of those folks at great personal expense to them, beyond being fined $250 or $1,000, we've had folks spend thousands of dollars to make their property compliant, to remove vehicles, to move fences, to do other things like that, whether it be an encroachment or any other type of case. So they're not walking away with just a $250 fine. A lot of them are spending a lot of money to get their stuff back in order. So we're trying. We don't want to be in the business of doing that for them or paying some contractor to do it, because then we're trying to recover tens of thousands of dollars if we're paying somebody else to come in and do that for us. On that note, obviously, we've tried to combine that unit so that they're more efficient. We've tried to become more efficient and effective with the people that we have with both of those things. We got a little ahead, but obviously with the budget, that's a consideration. I've talked to Kyle. We have funds to cover what we've already overspent in that, but we're also in a position where we can't simply stop and say, we won't do another hearing until we get to July because we've expended all of our money. Many of these cases are in, and several of you have been to the hearings or met with people. They've already come in and they've been given a 30-day deadline or a 60-day deadline or a 90-day deadline to come back before the ALJ. We've pushed our next hearing out to April because we wanted to talk to you and let you know where we're at with that. Kyle and I are working on an amendment to get us to 0, but we still need to have additional hearings because we've got people in the process and we need to bring them back in and make sure they've become compliant. We have people that we need to bring back in who've become compliant but haven't paid their fine. So there's a lot of things that the process needs to continue to function. We think that we could probably keep it around $5,000 additional to what we've spent now to make it to the end of the year. But we'll also have to have a conversation about the 26 budget and then keep an eye on where we set future budgets and how much that's gonna cost us. The encroachments are gonna go away as we get through those. We're 50 plus that have been resolved of the 85 now and multiple that are in that window of returning to court to get compliant. So those are gonna go away, but our other cases are starting to increase as we're becoming more proactive and out in the community, and people are understanding that we have community services folks that will come out and deal with problems and other complaints. So I don't think we're going to see the number of cases go away. They're just going to change what types of cases are becoming before the ALJ. The other conversation that we've been having, and a lot with Matt Brooks, the Assistant City Attorney, we've been talking at length about animal services cases. A lot of the cities that Guardian Law represents at ALJ, they run most of their animal services violations, leash violations, nuisance barking violations, things of that nature through the civil side and then do civil hearings on those. And a lot of those go through, and as Matt and I have talked about this, they go through a hearing officer, but the ALJ would be step 2. So if they come in and meet with a hearing officer, let's say for instance Estad, and they're unhappy and they want to appeal that, the appeal process would then go to the ALJ. So it would keep it in that same house, but it would also pull it out of our justice court, and it would probably be a little bit more efficient for us. And on that same note, we think that it's probably a good idea to route our parking that same direction. It's a civil thing. Most cities don't send parking tickets to their criminal justice court. They send them to their civil side of their in-house court. I worked for an unnamed transit authority here in the valley for several years. We ran 85% of all of our citations on the law enforcement side through our civil side of our house, and we had an employee who was designated twice a month. She would hold hearings at the PD down in the city, and people would come in. It was super efficient, it was super effective, it was much faster, and quite frankly, a parking ticket is probably fairly low on the priority scale over at the Justice Court, so it would give us some more control over that, so.
And the money that's collected through the court system, 80% of it goes to the state, 20% is retained by the city. When you go through administrative process, we retain all of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there other citations that we could funnel through there?
We certainly could look at our system, with the code enforcement, animal services type violations and parking, those are probably the 3 primary ones that would really be the most effective. Obviously, there's building violations and other things that potentially could make it into the ALJ and could be a civil fine through that same process. We've already had a couple cases on the docket that have come up through the building. Business licensing as well could potentially be an ALJ or a civil hearing and then the ALJ or a hearing officer. So those are all options that are on the table that we could look at. Any questions?
No, so you're talking about you just need basically double the budget for this year, right? You need about 20 instead of 10. And
Well,
and we're getting about
so-
$40,000 back to offset.
Yes and no. we're gonna steal 50% from unexpended money that I have in other areas and just move it. But yes, we probably need another 50% to keep that going.
And by stealing, he means just moving.
Yeah, regardless. Just
The
grabbing it.
visual
What choice of words?
From that liquor fund?
Yeah,
right.
liquor fund, yeah,
You're
talking about.
grabbing it from a different pocket.
Kyle and I have talked about it. We have several underspent funds, even in community services, training, supplies and equipment, that wherever Kyle just tells me that.
Well,
that's the
I'll work
best
with Chief Carr, 'cause ultimately it's his budget, so and those are scheduled to come to a budget amendment next council meeting.
And when I read your staff report, so it sounds like you're not losing employees or gaining employees, you're just reorganizing to be more efficient, correct?
Correct, yeah. We had the 3 animal services people, and 2 code enforcement people. We still have a total of 5. We've just shifted that supervisory role and created the administrative animal shelter role. And then we have taken the 2 animal services patrol people and the 2 code enforcement, field people and tried to make sure that they both understand each other's roles so that they can cover. They still have your primary assignment's animal services, your primary assignment is code enforcement. But if Wendy calls me on a Saturday and Black Ridge Reservoir is overrun with a parking problem, I have 2 people. I have an animal services people. I know, so it's just in the past. Code enforcement, animal services can both go there. They're both branded the same, they drive the same marked vehicle, they have the same patches on their uniform and everything. To the public, it doesn't appear any different, even though my primary assignment might be dealing with animals all day long. Right now, I'm here because there's a
Same,
parking
same.
problem.
Same, Black Ridge, same.
But doubled our ability.
Yeah, so we've doubled our ability.
Same dollar,
And-
doubled the ability.
And if somebody wants to take a day off, and that's been an issue for us before, where one person on one of those 2 tracks takes a day off on a weekday or a weekend day, the other person's trained and operational and can just jump right in and take over and help out with whatever that is, or heavy traffic, snowstorm, parking problems, crashes, they're interchangeable.
No, I love that you changed this and it sounds way more efficient, so thank you.
He thinks he's
for
from
that. And then
Ohio.
the only other question, sometimes we make decisions here that have some fallout on your end. Obviously, some of this is from encroachments and all those things. I think our direction has been, this is how we wanna run with encroachments. So anytime there's feedback to us that this is really bogging us down, it's causing problems for us. So if you have any of that type of feedback for us, that would be good. But I think it's important, I understand, because I can see we had $4,000 back and it's gonna cost us 20 to go through the process.
Sure.
And I think some people are of the impression that, oh, you're just doing this so you make money off this. Well, that's clearly not the case. But I don't think that we should necessarily increase the fines to recoup our costs because they already are, like you said, incurring a lot of expenses to try and take care of things. And a lot of the time, I would say probably most of the time, there are things that they inherited when they got the property and they probably didn't even know it was a problem anyway.
Sure.
So I think
On that
this-
note, though, the fine is only a result of their inaction to that point.
well,
correct?
there's an
Most of the time.
administrative,
Sometimes, certainly, yes.
but there's still an administrative fee that we might, not necessarily a fine, but there's still a fee that's gonna be associated with going through it.
So obviously, we have more fines that we anticipate will come in before the end of this budget year. Right now, we have received roughly $4,600. So of the $20,000 that we've spent just to pay for the administrative law judge, not to pay our employees to go out and work every day, we've only recovered roughly, right now, 30%, but by the end of the year, 25 to 30% of the cost just that we pay for the administrative law judge. So it's a no win. We're spending money on that. It's a cost to the city. We have also been trying to solve a 26-year problem.
Right.
We incorporated as a city in 1999, and a lot of these encroachment issues have rolled for years and years and years, as you all know. And 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, we said, okay, we have a plan, we have a procedure, we need to move forward, and we're going to try and solve these problems. So we've been working through that process and trying to go back and correct a lot of things that have been lingering, waiting for a solution for a long time.
Right, but I think that you also said that even though that's the case, we're not just gonna see it dive off, we're gonna see other issues continue. And I think it's probably a level of service issue that we even talked about with everything else. It's like, if you want your community to look like this, there's a cost associated with it because your code enforcement is gonna cost more. We're gonna probably have to have more people, those types of things, if you want your level of service to be here. If you don't wanna pay for that, then your level of service is gonna be down here with code enforcement. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think every city experiences, we're a young city, we're new, we have a lot of brand new shiny stuff. But as those things age, as people move in and out, as properties become rental property, whatever, we're going to see more need for code enforcement to keep the city at the level that I think we all want it to be. I live in the city, we all want it to be nice, we want it to stay, people to keep their properties up and to, keep their things looking nice. So I think we're going to shift away from some of those construction-related issues. And that's what a lot of these are, is at the time the home was built, an encroachment or something like that occurred, and now we've had to go back and fix it. But we're gonna run into more and more cases where, folks are failing to keep up their property. Their property's starting to age, their kids are getting older, and they have a ton of vehicles because now that they have a bunch of teenage kids and they didn't when they moved in.
Right.
All of those types of code-related things to keep the neighborhood nice. But like the chief and I have talked about, and I think we all have too, is at the code level, it's a whole lot cheaper to chase that problem down and get it fixed than it is at the police level.
Yeah, for sure.
So to keep that clean and nice and shiny and keeps it a nice community, nice neighbors, everybody's happy. But if we let it go, take you down Mountain View corridor and show you what's gonna happen.
Then the police line that went like this is gonna go faster like that.
It's gonna be like the
Getting
cannibal
steeper.
ride.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll go
Inverted.
backward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, appreciate
No
it.
questions, you bet?
Thank you. Good update, good to have you. Let's do more than once every 2 years.
Yeah, we like
We'd like to see
We like
Marcus.
to see,
around, too.
yeah.
All right.
And bring Marcus, he was
Yeah,
good.
bring Marcus too.
They really wanna see Mark.
Marcus,
No questions, I liked it.
Mayor, can I just add that encroachment was a big lift, and so my hat's off to a lot of people in this room that helped. It wasn't just the police.
Yeah.
So, it's a huge lift, and they got it done quick, really.
Appreciate it.
And maybe just one other quick thing that I left out is the MDT meetings. So if you're not familiar with that, a year and a half ago, we went around and identified all of the different business units, from building, from planning, from engineering, from licensing, from customer service. And we try to bring those people together with code enforcement and animal services in the same room once a month to have a meeting to talk about those problems that cross. Because we're seeing the cross where there's something out of Catherine's house that's a building related issue and it's worked itself into an encroachment issue. We're seeing business licensing problems where somebody's using their business or isn't licensed or whatever. And so to make sure that all of those people are in the same room talking about that problem and addressing who's gonna tackle it, who's has the knowledge. Do we need a building inspector to come out and work on this problem? Does need to come because she's the business licensing person? But we've been meeting monthly or tried to meet monthly. Sometimes it'll get canceled for the holidays or whatever, but that group has tried to meet regularly so that everybody at that working level is communicating and trying to come up with the best response to these problems. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, really
Because
good.
the most frustrating thing, whether it's city related or anything else you try to do, is you call and try to get your issue resolved, and you're told, that's not my department, call these people.
Yeah.
So you call those people, well, that's not what I do, call these people, and you just go around and it's nobody's issue, and you can't get help, so that's great.
And as you've seen, those of you that have come out on the encroachments, the direction I've given my people is do not pass the buck. Do not send someone who's frustrated with the city about whatever the issue is. Oh, you need to call building, you need to call planning, you need to
Just
call
get a
zoning.
voicemail.
What's your issue? I'll reach out to them, I'll get you some information, I'll contact you back.
Awesome.
I'll be the gatekeeper, the middleman, whatever, or I'll put you in touch with that person so that you can get the answer you need. Because even as a policeman, I don't know, call the detective, it's not mine, I don't know, that's not a great way to do business. I don't know the answer, but I'll find the person that does and I'll call you back.
That's
They can just pass that along. Lauren, P-A-L-M.
No, no,
I think that works. I think that works, cause I get a lot coming the other direction from him.
He's got it forwarded to you.
Appreciate it, BA. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate all you do. Okay, I don't think we can get through any of these items looking at them.
I'll make a motion to temporarily recess work meeting to go into general meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, everybody, good, opposed, tonight?
Yep. You didn't see that?
Good job, Lucas.